You think you have a stable job, a straight path forward. Then, in one Friday afternoon, it all comes crashing down. But sometimes, that fall opens another door. The door to revenge, cold and calculated. And when I, a young woman, began rewriting the rules, none of them suspected that Monday would become their new nightmare. They thought they'd buried me with that termination letter. They had no idea I was already digging their graves from my apartment. Laptop open, strategy forming, evidence gathering. Friday, they fired me. By Monday, I was coming for them. My name is Jessica Miller, and until 4:47 p.m. last Friday, I believed I was building something real at Brightline Strategies. 32 years old, 5 years with the company. Countless late nights perfecting pitch decks and campaign strategies that landed us 3 major accounts last quarter alone. I lived alone in a 1-bedroom apartment on Maple Street, the kind with exposed brick that screamed, "Young professional on the rise." My LinkedIn profile said Senior Strategic Communications Manager. My business card sat in a neat silver holder on my desk, the desk I'd never sit at again. The summons came through Slack. "Jessica, could you pop by conference room C? Quick sync with Richard and Clara." Richard Hale, my direct supervisor. The man who'd promised me a director position by year's end. Clara Weston, HR, with her practiced smile that never reached her eyes. I remember the walk down that hallway. My heels clicked against the polished concrete floor, the industrial chic aesthetic our CEO loved to brag about to clients. Through the glass walls, I saw my colleagues bent over their screens, the Friday afternoon energy already bleeding into weekend mode. Sarah from accounts caught my eye and quickly looked away. That should have been my first warning. "Jessica, please sit." Richard didn't meet my eyes. His Yale class ring caught the afternoon sun streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Beside him, Clara had a manila folder positioned precisely parallel to the edge of the table. Everything about that room screamed corporate efficiency. The minimalist furniture, the single succulent in a geometric planter. The wall-mounted screen displaying our company values. Integrity, innovation, impact. "We need to discuss some organizational changes," Clara began, her voice hitting that HR tone I'd heard her use with others but never with me. "Due to the current economic climate and the need to streamline operations, we're having to make some difficult decisions regarding our team structure." The words floated past me like smoke. Economic climate, streamline, difficult decisions, corporate euphemisms designed to soften the blow. But I felt it coming like a freight train. "Your position is being eliminated, effective immediately." Richard finally looked up then, and I saw something in his eyes. Not regret, not sympathy, but relief. Like he'd been holding his breath and could finally exhale. "This isn't about performance," he added quickly. "You've been exceptional. It's purely a business decision." Exceptional. The word tasted like copper in my mouth. Exceptional employees don't get fired on Friday afternoons. They don't get marched out with a cardboard box while security hovers nearby, pretending to check their phones. "You'll receive 2 weeks severance, continued health coverage through the end of the month. And of course, we'll provide a positive reference." Clara slid papers across the table. "We'll need your laptop, company phone, and access badges before you leave today." 20 minutes. That's all it took to dismantle 5 years. Clara walked me back to my desk, standing close enough that everyone knew what was happening, but far enough to maintain professional distance. I dumped my personal items into the box they provided, my coffee mug that said, "But first, coffee." The framed photo from last year's company retreat where we'd all pretended to be a family. The emergency heels I kept in my bottom drawer. My teammates kept their eyes glued to their screens. Even Marcus, who'd grabbed drinks with me just last night, discussing the Johnson campaign we were supposed to present Monday. He knew. They all knew. The elevator ride down felt endless. Clara maintained her professional smile all the way to the lobby. "I'm sure you'll land on your feet," she said as she collected my badge. "Someone with your skills won't be unemployed long." Standing on the sidewalk, holding that pathetic box while people streamed around me heading to happy hour, I felt the full weight of it crash down. My carefully constructed life. The apartment I could barely afford on the promise of that promotion. The student loans I'd been aggressively paying down. The image I'd cultivated as a rising star in Cedar Field's growing tech scene. All of it balanced on a job that had just vanished. But it was the look in Richard's eyes that kept replaying. That relief. Like he'd been planning this, waiting for the right moment. And Clara's practiced efficiency. Too smooth, too prepared. This wasn't a sudden decision. This was an execution, and I'd walked right into it, believing in company values printed on a wall. Thinking exceptional meant something more than expendable. The wine was my third glass. Maybe fourth. I'd stopped counting after the sun went down and my apartment fell into that particular Friday night darkness that felt heavier than usual. My phone sat on the coffee table, screen lighting up with notifications I couldn't bring myself to check. The last text from my mom asking about weekend plans. A LinkedIn alert about someone viewing my profile. Nothing from anyone at Brightline. I'd called Marcus first, straight to voicemail. Then Sarah, who answered on the third ring with that careful tone people use when they're standing near someone important. "Jess, I'm so sorry. I can't really talk right now. You know how it is." Click. Yeah, I knew how it was. The unspoken rule: distance yourself from the departed before the stench of termination becomes contagious. My laptop sat open on the kitchen counter, cursor blinking in my Gmail. I'd started typing resignation emails 3 times, to my landlord, to my gym, to the wine club I'd joined because successful people had wine clubs. Delete, delete, delete. Not yet. I wasn't ready to admit defeat to the algorithms tracking my every financial move. Sleep was impossible. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling fan, replaying every interaction from the past month. Richard asking me to hand over the Morrison account to Trevor, just to help him develop. Clara's sudden interest in documenting my processes for continuity planning. The whispered conversations that stopped when I entered the break room. God, I'd been so blind, so focused on that director position he'd dangled like a carrot. At 3 a.m., I gave up and opened my laptop again. The bourbon had replaced the wine, and my fingers moved on autopilot, logging into my personal email where I'd automatically forwarded important communications. A habit from my first job where a colleague had been locked out without warning. Hundreds of emails from Brightline, threads about campaigns, budget discussions, meeting notes. One thread caught my eye: Richard and Clara discussing personnel optimization, dated 3 weeks ago. My name wasn't mentioned, but there was a spreadsheet attachment. Phase 1 candidates. I downloaded it, hands shaking. There I was, highlighted in yellow. With notes: high salary relative to level. Position redundant with Trevor's expanded role. Minimal legal risk. Minimal legal risk. Like I was a line item in a budget, a problem to be solved. Saturday blurred into Sunday. I ordered takeout I didn't eat, showered only because the hot water ran out, ignored my sister's calls. The apartment felt like a prison and a sanctuary simultaneously. Outside, Cedar Field went about its weekend. Farmers market on Saturday morning, brunch crowds at the trendy spots downtown, Sunday joggers passing my window. Normal people living normal lives while I sat in yesterday's clothes, scrolling through job boards that all wanted 5 years of experience for entry-level pay or 10 years for what I'd just lost. The group chat from college lit up with plans for next weekend. I muted it. My friend Emma texted about meeting for coffee. I sent back, not feeling well. Rain check? Knowing she'd probably heard through the professional grapevine. News travels fast in a city that pretends to be bigger than it is. Sunday night, the panic really set in. Rent was due in 12 days. $1,850 for my affordable luxury apartment. Car payment on the 15th. Student loans on auto debit that would hit regardless of my employment status. The severance would cover maybe a month if I cut everything non-essential. My savings, what I hadn't spent trying to look the part of a rising executive, might stretch another month beyond that. I pulled up my bank app, calculating and recalculating like the numbers might somehow change. The credit card I'd used for that work wardrobe, those networking dinners where I'd grabbed the check to seem generous and successful, The weekend trip to Chicago for that conference Richard suggested would raise my profile. All investments in a future that had been deleted with the same efficiency as a redundant file. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Heard about Brightline. That sucks. They did the same thing to me last year. Derek Thompson. I remembered him now. Sharp developer who'd suddenly disappeared last spring. Same story, different department. I texted back, did they give you the "it's not about performance" speech too? Word for word, Clara's got it memorized. Richard promised me team lead, then hired his buddy from Yale instead. You were probably getting too expensive, too good. Classic move. Too good, too expensive. Too much of a threat to Richard's carefully constructed kingdom where mediocre men from the right schools made decisions about exceptional women who'd worked twice as hard to get half as far. I poured the last of the bourbon, staring at that spreadsheet on my screen. Phase 1 candidates, which meant there was a Phase 2, maybe more. How many careers would they destroy to protect their bonuses? How many lives would they disrupt with their surgical precision, their minimal legal risk calculations? The clock on my laptop showed 11:47 p.m. Sunday was almost over. Monday loomed ahead. The first Monday in 5 years, I wouldn't commute to that glass building, wouldn't swipe my badge, wouldn't pretend to care about strategic innovations and synergistic solutions. But somewhere between the bourbon and the bitter taste of betrayal, a different feeling started to surface. Not acceptance, not defeat, but something sharper. They thought they'd calculated everything, assessed all the risks, covered all their bases. They thought I'd disappear quietly into the night. Another casualty of corporate optimization. They thought wrong. Monday morning arrived with aggressive sunlight streaming through my blinds, highlighting the empty wine bottles and abandoned takeout containers. 6:47 a.m. My body had woken at its usual time. Muscle memory of a routine that no longer existed. For a moment, I lay there, feeling the weight of nowhere to go, no meetings to prepare for, no campaigns to review. Then the thought hit me like cold water. If they think I'll disappear quietly, they're wrong. I sat up, head pounding from the weekend self-pity session, but my mind suddenly crystal clear. They'd made one critical mistake. They'd underestimated me. Richard and Clara had calculated the legal risks, the financial costs, the operational impact, but they hadn't calculated what a strategic communications expert with nothing to lose might do with insider knowledge and a grudge. Coffee first, strong, black, clarifying. I opened my laptop and created a new folder. Project Redemption. Too dramatic. Delete. Career Transition. Too passive. Delete. Finally. Strategic Response. Perfect. Corporate enough to feel professional. Vague enough to mean anything. I started mapping out what I knew, what I had, what they didn't know I had. 5 years of emails backed up to my personal account, contact lists for every major client, every journalist who'd covered our campaigns, every industry influencer we'd cultivated. Screenshots of Slack conversations where Richard had taken credit for my ideas. The spreadsheet showing their optimization plans. Performance reviews that contradicted their economic climate excuse. But raw data wasn't enough. I needed to understand the full picture, the weak points in their armor. Brightline had built its reputation on trust, on being the ethical alternative to the big agencies. Integrity, innovation, impact. What if that integrity was performative? What if the innovation was stolen? What if the impact was fabricated? I pulled up Brightline's website, studying it with fresh eyes. The case studies I'd written now presented as Richard's victories. The team page where my face had already been removed, like I'd never existed. The client testimonials, carefully curated to hide the accounts we'd lost. The projects that had failed under Richard's actual leadership versus my shadow management. My phone buzzed. Derek Thompson again. Want to grab coffee? I might have information you'd find interesting. We met at Grounded, a coffee shop downtown where Brightline employees never went, too bohemian for their refined tastes. Derek looked better than when he'd worked at Brightline, like leaving had lifted a weight. You're in the anger phase, he said, studying my face. I can see it. Same look I had. The good news is, it's productive if you channel it right. I'm not looking for therapy, Derek. Not offering it, I'm offering intelligence. He pulled out his phone, showing me a LinkedIn post. Richard's been shopping himself to other agencies, has been for months. Word is, he's trying to package Brightline's client list as his personal portfolio to land a VP role elsewhere. The pieces clicked. Richard wasn't just eliminating expensive employees, he was eliminating witnesses, people who could contradict his inflated narrative. There's more, Derek continued. Clara's not just HR, she's been taking kickbacks from the recruiting firms she uses for executive searches. Every time she brings in one of Richard's Yale buddies, she gets a finder's fee she doesn't report. I have documents. Why didn't you do anything with this? Derek shrugged. I wanted to move on, find peace. But you? You've got that look. The one that says you're going to burn it all down. I couldn't. But maybe you can. Back in my apartment, I started building my strategy. Not a chaotic revenge plot, but something surgical. Strategic. I'd spent 5 years learning how to control narratives, how to shape public perception, how to make information spread organically through the right channels. They'd taught me these skills, and now I'd use them. First layer, the reputation attack. Anonymous tips to industry newsletters about Brightline's recent client losses. The real reasons behind the restructuring. Nothing traceable to me, just concerned insider observations. Second layer, the network disruption. Reach out to former clients, not to badmouth, but to check in as a concerned former employee. Plant seeds of doubt about the stability of their accounts under Richard's direct management. Third layer, the evidence compilation. Everything Derek had, everything I had, organized into a compelling narrative about corporate misconduct. Not for immediate release, but as insurance, as leverage. I created anonymous email accounts, downloaded VPN software, studied how whistleblowers protected themselves. My years of crisis management for clients had taught me how information flows, how scandals build, how companies fall apart from the inside when trust erodes. By evening, I had 23 pages of notes, 5 anonymous accounts established, and a timeline for controlled information release. They'd given me 2 weeks of severance. I'd give them 2 weeks of gradually escalating problems, each one seemingly unconnected, each one striking at a different vulnerability. The productivity felt intoxicating after the weekend's despair. This wasn't just about revenge, it was about justice. How many others had they discarded? How many careers had they destroyed while protecting their own mediocrity? I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror, hair unwashed, eyes bloodshot. But there was something else there now. Purpose. They'd fired Jessica Miller, Senior Strategic Communications Manager. But they'd created something else, someone with skills, knowledge, and absolutely nothing left to lose. Tomorrow, I'd shower, put on my best outfit, and start networking with competitors. Let them see me around town, professionally moving forward. Meanwhile, the real work would happen in the shadows, in the anonymous spaces where truth could be weaponized. They thought Friday was the end of my story at Brightline. They had no idea Monday was just the beginning of theirs. Tuesday morning, I dressed like I had a job interview, blazer pressed, makeup flawless, the kind of put-together appearance that would make people think I was thriving. The performance of success was crucial now. If anyone from Brightline saw me falling apart, they'd dismiss me as bitter, unstable. But if I appeared to be moving forward, they'd lower their guard. I spent the morning at the public library, using their computers to dig deeper. The research skills that had made me valuable at Brightline now served a different purpose. I started with public records, Brightline's tax filings, Richard's property records, Clara's LinkedIn history. Every piece of data painted a picture. Richard Hale owned a $750,000 house in Oakwood Heights, 2 BMWs, and had recently purchased a boat. All on a salary that public records suggested was around $130,000. The math didn't add up unless he had another source of income. Or unless he was skimming from somewhere. Clara Weston's history was even more interesting. 3 companies in 8 years, always leaving just before major layoffs or scandals. She was a professional cleaner, brought in to handle the dirty work, then moving on before consequences arrived. Her recommendations on LinkedIn were all from executives who'd later been investigated for various improprieties. But the real goldmine came from my old emails. I'd been meticulous about documentation, a habit from my first boss who taught me to cover your ass in writing. Threads where Richard explicitly took credit for my campaigns in emails to the CEO. Messages where Clara discussed performance issues with employees who'd later filed discrimination complaints that mysteriously disappeared. Then I found it. An email chain from 2 years ago I'd almost forgotten. The Steinberg account, our biggest client at the time. Richard had promised them deliverables we couldn't meet, then pressured me to falsify progress reports. I'd pushed back in writing, suggesting we be transparent about delays. His response, just make it work. Jessica. Sometimes we need to manage perception before reality. I'd made it work, pulling 70-hour weeks to deliver. But I'd kept everything, his original promises, the false reports he'd sent before I fixed things, the client's complaints that I'd personally resolved without his knowledge. My phone rang. Emma, my friend from college who worked at a competing agency. Jess, I heard about Brightline. That's insane. You were their star player. It happens, I said, keeping my voice light. Actually, good timing. I was ready for something new. Really? Because I heard Richard's been telling people you had performance issues, that they tried to help, but... The rage flared white hot, but I kept my voice steady. That's interesting. I have all my performance reviews. All exceeds expectations. In fact, I have lots of documentation about my time there. Very thorough documentation. Emma paused. You know, we're looking for a senior strategist. Can you meet for drinks Thursday? After we hung up, I made a decision. Drinks with Emma would be perfect. Visible, public, showing I was moving forward. But first, I had more research to do. I created a spreadsheet of every project I'd worked on, cross-referenced with Richard's claims about his achievements. The pattern was clear. Every successful campaign in his portfolio had my fingerprints all over it. Every failure was something he'd managed directly. Wednesday brought an unexpected gift. My former colleague Priya texted, "Can't talk but check your personal email." There it was, forwarded from her personal account, a recording from Monday's all-hands meeting, Richard explaining my departure, his voice oozing false regret. Jessica struggled to adapt to our evolving needs. We tried to provide support, but sometimes people just aren't the right fit anymore. Not the right fit. After 5 years of exceeding every metric, landing every client I pitched, saving his ass countless times. The recording also captured something else, nervous laughter from the team, the kind that comes from fear, not humor. They knew they could be next. Priya had included a note. He did the same thing to 3 others last year. We're all scared. Some of us are looking to leave but need time. Be careful. But know you have allies. Allies. I hadn't expected that. I started a new document. Internal assets. Priya, definitely. Marcus had gone silent, but his girlfriend had liked my LinkedIn post about exploring new opportunities. Subtle support. The junior designers Richard constantly berated. They'd remember who actually mentored them. The accounts team who knew I'd fought for their bonuses when Richard wanted to cut them. Thursday afternoon. I met Derek again. He brought a flash drive. Everything I collected before I left, he said. Invoices that don't match deliverables. Contracts with suspicious amendments. Clara's emails about making harassment complaints go away. I was too tired to use it. But you? You look energized. I look unemployed, I corrected. No, you look like someone with a mission. There's a difference. That evening, I organized everything into folders. Financial irregularities, false testimonials, discrimination patterns, client deception. Each folder was a potential bomb. But I needed more than potential. I needed proof that would stick. Consequences they couldn't spin. My LinkedIn showed 12 profile views from Brightline employees. They were watching me, curious or concerned. Good. Let them wonder what I was doing, who I was talking to, what I knew. Friday marked 1 week since my termination. I sat in my apartment, surrounded by printed documents, laptop open to multiple spreadsheets. I'd mapped out every player: Richard, Clara, the CEO who turned a blind eye, the board members who rubber-stamped decisions, the clients who didn't know they were being deceived. The picture was clear now. Brightline wasn't just poorly managed, it was corrupt. Richard wasn't just taking credit, he was taking money. Clara wasn't just bad at HR, she was actively covering up crimes. And I had the receipts for all of it. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Heard you're digging into Brightline. Be careful. They have lawyers. I texted back, so do whistleblowers. The response was immediate. Conference room C has cameras. They recorded your termination. Might want to request that footage before it disappears. An ally I didn't know I had. I added it to my list. Get the termination recording. If they'd been as dismissive and cold as I remembered, if they'd said things that contradicted their current narrative, that footage would be gold. 1 week down, I looked at my strategic plan, the 3-layer approach I'd outlined Monday. Time to move from research to action. They'd given me 2 weeks of severance, thinking it would buy my silence. They should have given me more. Saturday morning, I sat at my kitchen table with 3 laptops open, my personal one, an old backup I'd wiped clean for anonymous work, and a refurbished one I'd bought with cash from a pawn shop. 3 devices, 3 IP addresses, 3 layers of separation between Jessica Miller and what was about to unfold. The strategy was elegant in its simplicity. Like a good campaign, it needed multiple touchpoints, organic growth, and plausible deniability. I'd spent 5 years learning how to make messages spread naturally through digital ecosystems. Now I'd weaponize that knowledge. Layer 1. The reputation erosion. I started with Glassdoor, Indeed, and every employer review site that mattered. Not a flood of negative reviews, that would be obvious. Just one carefully crafted review on each platform, posted from different coffee shops around the city. Each with unique writing styles I developed from years of ghostwriting executive communications. Middle management takes credit for team victories while throwing staff under the bus for their failures, wrote a former employee on Glassdoor. 3 stars, not 1. Believable disappointment, not vengeful rage. Promises of advancement never materialize unless you're part of the boys' club. Added another on Indeed. Watched talented women and minorities consistently passed over for promotions given to underqualified internal hires. Each review included specific enough details to be credible, but vague enough to be untraceable. I mentioned the Morrison account success, my work, Richard's credit, the toxic Monday morning meetings, real, the sudden restructuring that seemed to target higher earners, documentable. Within hours, current employees started adding their own reviews, real ones. The fear and frustration I'd sensed were pouring out now that someone had opened the floodgate. Layer 2. The internal disruption. This required more finesse. I drafted emails from anonymous accounts to key clients, but didn't send them yet. Instead, I reached out to former clients we'd lost, the ones Richard had alienated with his arrogance. Hi, David, I wrote to the CEO of a tech startup we'd fumbled last year. I recently left Brightline and wanted to apologize personally for how your account was mishandled. I fought internally for a different approach, but leadership insisted on strategies I knew wouldn't serve your goals. Your instincts to leave were correct. David responded within an hour. Jessica, I wondered what happened with that campaign. We loved your initial pitch, but what we got was completely different. Richard told us you'd been reassigned due to performance issues. Performance issues. While I'd been working weekends to salvage Richard's disasters, I forwarded David the original pitch documents, my pitch, with my name on them, dated before Richard's revision that had cost us the account. Feel free to share this with anyone asking for references about Brightline's executive team, I added. By afternoon, David had posted on LinkedIn about the importance of authentic leadership in agency partnerships, with some very specific examples that any industry insider would recognize as Brightline's failures. Layer 3. The evidence bombs. This was the delicate part. I created a simple website on the dark web. Nothing illegal, just anonymous. BrightlineLeaks.org. Using Derek's documents and my evidence, I built a timeline of financial irregularities, client deceptions, and HR cover-ups. Each claim linked to supporting documents, emails, recordings. But I didn't publicize it yet. Instead, I sent the link to 3 people: a journalist who covered corporate malfeasance for the Cedarfield Tribune, a member of Brightline's board who had a reputation for integrity, and the Department of Labor's anonymous tip line. The journalist, Melissa Kane, called me from a blocked number within 2 hours. "Is this real?" she asked. "Every document is authentic. Every email has headers you can verify. Every financial record matches public filings. Why now?" "Because they're about to do it to more people. Check the Phase 2 list on page 47. I heard her typing, then a sharp intake of breath. 23 more employees, including 2 who just had babies, targeted for elimination by year-end, while Richard Hale negotiates his golden parachute to jump ship. Can you go on record? Not yet, but others will once you start asking questions. Start with former employees from the last 18 months. Derek Thompson, Sarah Valdez, Mike Morrison, they all have stories. Sunday was for refinement. I monitored social media, watching the reviews gain traction. A Reddit thread appeared. Anyone else have horror stories about Brightline strategies? I didn't start it, but I contributed anonymously, sharing rumors about executive misconduct that happened to align with documentable facts. Emma texted about our drinks meeting. Heard some interesting chatter about Brightline this weekend. Industry people are talking. You getting interviews elsewhere? A few. I lied, then told the truth. But I'm being selective. Want to make sure my next move is to a company with actual integrity. Smart. BTW. Richard called our CEO yesterday, warning him not to hire you. Said you were unstable and vindictive. My CEO told him to fuck off. Unstable and vindictive. They were scared? Good. Monday morning, exactly 1 week after they'd started strategizing against me, I posted on LinkedIn, not an attack, just a professional update. Excited to announce I'm exploring new opportunities after 5 incredible years at Brightline Strategies. Proud of the campaigns I led, the clients I served, and the team members I mentored. Looking forward to bringing my strategic communication expertise to an organization that values both innovation and integrity. Open to work. Within an hour, I had 6 messages from recruiters, 4 interview requests, and 12 endorsements from former colleagues, including 3 current Brightline employees brave enough to publicly support me. But the real victory came at 11 a.m. when Priya texted, "Emergency all-hands meeting. Richard looks pale. Clara's been in the bathroom crying. Something's happening." I opened my laptop and pulled up the Cedarfield Tribune website. There it was. Melissa Kane's byline. Local marketing firm under investigation for financial irregularities, discrimination patterns. The article was careful, factual, citing multiple sources and documented evidence. It mentioned ongoing Department of Labor investigations, client complaints, and a pattern of targeting high-performing employees who might expose executive misconduct. My phone rang. Blocked number. "Miss Ad Miller, this is Patricia Coleman from the Department of Labor. We received your anonymous tip and would like to discuss your experiences at Brightline Strategies. Would you be willing to meet with our investigators?" "Absolutely," I said, looking at my wall of evidence. My 3-layer strategy manifesting perfectly. "I have extensive documentation you'll find interesting." They thought they'd eliminated a problem when they fired me. Instead, they'd activated their biggest threat, someone who knew their secrets, understood their weaknesses, and had nothing left to lose but everything to prove. The war wasn't over, but the first battle was mine. Tuesday morning brought the first visible cracks in Brightline's facade. Priya sent screenshots from the internal Slack, channels lighting up with panic. People questioning leadership, demanding answers about the Tribune article. Richard had sent a company-wide email at 6 a.m., subject line, regarding recent misrepresentations in media. Team, you may have seen false and defamatory claims circulating about our company. These are the desperate actions of a disgruntled former employee who was terminated for legitimate performance reasons. We stand behind our values and our decisions. Do not engage with media. All inquiries should be directed to legal. Disgruntled former employee, performance reasons. The lies were so blatant that even loyal employees started questioning. The Slack screenshots showed conversations. Anyone else find it weird that Jessica's work is still all over our portfolio? If she had performance issues, why did Richard present her campaigns at the conference last month? Has anyone actually seen these supposed performance reviews? By noon, 3 more former employees had contacted Melissa Kane. The story was growing legs, developing that organic momentum every PR professional dreams about, or nightmares about, depending on which side you're on. I met with the Department of Labor investigators at a federal building downtown. Patricia Coleman was exactly what you'd expect. Sharp suit, sharper mind, taking notes on everything. Ms. Miller, your documentation is extensive, she said, flipping through the papers I'd provided. This pattern of targeting employees before they vest in their retirement plans, it's concerning. I hadn't even noticed that pattern until she pointed it out. But there it was. Every Phase 1 termination happened months before full vesting. Hundreds of thousands in employer contributions saved. There's more, I said, pulling out Derek's flash drive. Financial irregularities that go beyond employment issues. Wednesday. The fear inside Brightline turned to chaos. A major client, Hartman Industries, announced they were reviewing their agency relationships in light of recent revelations. Translation, they were jumping ship. Their contract was worth $2.3 million annually, nearly 15% of Brightline's revenue. Richard called an emergency meeting with remaining senior staff. Priya, brave soul, recorded it on her phone. This is a witch hunt, orchestrated by people who couldn't cut it here. Anyone caught speaking to media or spreading these lies will be terminated immediately and sued for defamation. Clara is documenting everything. We know who's loyal and who isn't. The threat backfired spectacularly. Within hours, 2 senior developers quit on the spot. The creative director, someone who'd been with the company 8 years, sent his resignation via email, CC'd to the entire company. I cannot continue to work for leadership that threatens its own team instead of addressing legitimate concerns. Thursday afternoon. I was at a coffee shop interviewing with a boutique firm when my phone exploded with notifications. The Tribune had published a follow-up. Brightline Strategies CFO confirms internal investigation into executive spending. The CFO, William Park, was one of the few executives with actual integrity. He'd apparently discovered discrepancies in Richard's expense accounts, client dinners that clients never attended, conference fees for conferences he never went to, consulting payments to a company that existed only on paper and happened to be registered to his wife's maiden name. But the real bombshell came from an unexpected source. Clara Weston, perhaps seeing the writing on the wall, had lawyered up and turned whistleblower. Her attorney released a statement. Ms. Weston was pressured by senior leadership to engage in practices she found ethically questionable. She's cooperating fully with all investigations and looks forward to clearing her name. The rats were fleeing the sinking ship, and suddenly Clara wanted to be seen as a victim rather than an accomplice. That evening, Richard made a fatal mistake. He called me directly. "You vindictive little bitch," he started, his Yale polish completely gone. "You think you've won? I'll bury you. No one in this industry will touch you when I'm done. I'll sue you into bankruptcy." "Richard," I said calmly, hitting record on my phone. "Are you threatening me?" It's not a threat, it's a promise. You destroyed everything I built. Everything you built? You mean my campaigns? My client relationships? My strategies that you presented as yours? And Richard? You should know I'm recording this call. The silence stretched for 3 seconds before he hung up. Friday morning, I forwarded the recording to Patricia Coleman, Melissa Kane, and my newly retained attorney, a shark named Diana Chen, who specialized in wrongful termination and whistleblower protection. "This is perfect," Diana said. "Threatening a witness in a federal investigation, he just made our case for us." The Brightline board called an emergency meeting for that afternoon. By 5 p.m., 2 press releases hit the wire. Brightline Strategies announces leadership transition. Richard Hale steps down to pursue other opportunities. Brightline Strategies appoints independent committee to review operations and culture. Steps down. Pursues other opportunities. Corporate speak for fired in disgrace, but we're trying to minimize lawsuits. My phone rang. Emma from the competing agency. "Holy shit, Jess. You didn't just burn that bridge, you fucking nuked it. Also, our offer still stands if you want it." I looked around my apartment, at the wall of evidence I'd compiled, at the 3 laptops that had been my command center. 2 weeks since they'd fired me. 2 weeks to dismantle 5 years of their corruption. "Thanks, Emma. Let me think about it over the weekend." Saturday morning, I woke to more texts than I'd received in the past month. Former colleagues, industry contacts, even clients reaching out with support, job offers, congratulations. The narrative had completely flipped. I wasn't the terminated employee with performance issues, I was the whistleblower who'd exposed corruption. But the sweetest message came from an unknown number. "This is Bill Park, CFO at Brightline." Or former CFO, "I resigned yesterday. I wanted to apologize. I should have seen what was happening, should have acted sooner. Your courage in speaking up exposed things I'd been too comfortable to confront. If you need a reference for your next role, you have my complete support." I sat on my couch, still in pajamas, watching the morning news cover Brightline's implosion. The reporter mentioned a former employee whose wrongful termination sparked the investigation. They didn't name me, but everyone in the industry knew. The fear that had consumed me 2 weeks ago felt like a distant memory. The apartment I'd worried about losing now felt like a command center I'd conquered from. The career I thought was over had transformed into something more powerful. I wasn't just a communications manager anymore. I was the woman who'd brought down corruption, who'd fought back and won. My laptop dinged with an email from Diana Chen. "Department of Labor is recommending criminal charges for embezzlement. Also, I've drafted our wrongful termination suit." With Richard's threatening call and the evidence of retaliation, we're looking at substantial damages. Very substantial. Substantial damages. I thought about the fear, the sleepless nights, the humiliation of being marched out with a cardboard box. No amount of money would erase that, but it would definitely help me sleep better. Sunday evening, I prepared the final strike. Everything until now had been defensive, reactive, protecting myself while exposing their corruption. But I'd saved the most damaging evidence for last, the kind that would ensure Richard Hale and Clara Weston never worked in this industry again. The document was titled Project Phantom, a scheme I'd discovered buried in financial records from 2 years ago. Brightline had billed the Morrison Foundation, a nonprofit client, for work never performed. 50 hours of strategic consultation at premium rates, signed off by Richard, processed by Clara. The foundation, trusting their reputation, had never questioned it. That was 47,000 znorls stolen from a charity that funded children's literacy programs. I'd hesitated to use this earlier, wanting to verify every detail. But now, with Richard's threatening call recorded and Clara playing victim, it was time to deploy the nuclear option. I composed an email to Patricia Coleman at the Department of Labor, CCing the State Attorney General's office and the Morrison Foundation's Board of Directors. Attached were invoices, timesheets, emails where Richard explicitly instructed the accounting team to process this quietly. And Clara's response? Handled. Documentation adjusted per discussion. Stealing from a children's charity. Let them spin that. Monday morning, the story exploded beyond Cedar Field. National trade publications picked it up. Ohio marketing firm scandal expands, nonprofit fraud alleged. The Morrison Foundation released a statement expressing shock and disappointment, announcing they would audit all past transactions with Brightline and pursue full restitution. Richard's attorney released a desperate counter-statement. Mr. Hale categorically denies these baseless allegations. Any billing discrepancies were administrative errors, not intentional fraud. Administrative errors. For 50 hours of phantom work he personally signed off on. By noon, the FBI had joined the investigation. Federal wire fraud charges were now on the table. Priya texted me a photo from the Brightline office, agents carrying out boxes of documents, computers, files. The remaining employees were sent home indefinitely. Clara's attorney tried damage control, claiming she was manipulated and coerced by male superiors into participating in practices she didn't fully understand. The same Clara who'd terminated dozens of employees with surgical precision suddenly didn't understand billing fraud. Tuesday brought unexpected vindication. 3 current clients announced they were terminating their contracts immediately, citing breach of trust and ethical violations. The dominoes were falling faster than I'd anticipated. Brightline's reputation, built over 15 years, had collapsed in 15 days. That afternoon, Diana called with news. Richard's been arrested. Federal charges for wire fraud, embezzlement, and witness intimidation. His bail is set at $500,000. I felt no joy, just a cold satisfaction. He'd destroyed careers without blinking, stolen from charities, threatened anyone who challenged him. Now he'd face consequences. Wednesday, the Brightline board announced the company would file for bankruptcy. Hundreds of employees, good people who'd just been trying to do their jobs, would lose their livelihoods. That wasn't part of my plan. But it was Richard's ultimate legacy, destroying everything he touched, including the company he claimed to have built. Former colleagues reached out throughout the day. Some thanked me for exposing the truth. Others blamed me for the company's collapse. I understood both perspectives. Whistleblowing isn't clean or simple. It's messy, with collateral damage I hadn't fully anticipated. Marcus finally called. Jess, I'm sorry I didn't support you. I was scared. We all were. I know, I said, and I meant it. Fear was Richard's primary management tool. For what it's worth, you did the right thing. We all knew something was wrong, but nobody had the courage to act. You did. Thursday morning, Diana met me at her office with champagne. Settlement offer from Brightline's insurance company. They want to avoid a trial, especially with Richard facing criminal charges. The number she showed me was more than I'd make in 5 years. Enough to pay off my student loans, buy a real home, start over without financial fear. There's one condition, Diana added. A standard non-disclosure agreement about the settlement amount. But not about what they did? No, that's all public record now. You can talk about the fraud, the wrongful termination, everything except the specific dollar amount they're paying you. I signed immediately. Friday afternoon, exactly 3 weeks since my termination. I sat in the same coffee shop where this had all started, where I'd met Derek, where I'd plotted my strategy, where I'd taken the calls that changed everything. The news was playing on the TV above the counter. Former marketing executive Richard Hale indicted on 12 federal counts. His mugshot filled the screen. No more perfectly styled hair, no more confident smirk. Just a middle-aged man who'd finally met consequences. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. This is Trevor from Brightline. Or was from Brightline. I guess. I wanted you to know. Richard made me lie about taking over your accounts. He said if I didn't support his version, I'd be next. I'm sorry. I didn't respond. Trevor had made his choice, picked his side. His apology couldn't undo the damage, but at least he'd have to live with his conscience. The final email came that evening from the Morrison Foundation. Ms. Miller, thanks to your courage in coming forward, we've recovered the stolen funds and implemented new oversight measures. You've helped protect not just our organization, but countless others from similar fraud. If you ever want to put your communication skills toward nonprofit work, we'd be honored to have you. I closed my laptop and looked out at Cedarfield's skyline. 3 weeks ago, I'd stood on a sidewalk with a cardboard box, my career apparently over. Now, Richard was facing prison, Clara was unemployable, and Brightline was dust. I had financial security and job offers from companies that actually valued integrity. They'd fired me on Friday, thinking they'd destroyed me. By Monday, I'd been strategizing against them. By the third Friday, their entire world had collapsed. I raised my coffee cup in a silent toast to justice, to consequences, to the power of documentation and the danger of underestimating someone with nothing to lose. They'd thought I was disposable, forgettable, a problem to be eliminated. They'd thought wrong. 6 months later, I sat in my new apartment, a loft with exposed brick that I actually owned, not rented. The settlement had changed everything materially, but the real transformation was deeper. The television droned in the background. A true crime documentary I wasn't really watching until I heard the words. Former marketing executive Richard Hale was sentenced today to 8 years in federal prison for wire fraud, embezzlement, and witness intimidation. 8 years. I clicked off the TV and sat in silence. The afternoon sun slanted through floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the single box I'd never unpacked from Brightline, that pathetic cardboard box they'd given me to clear my desk. Inside, the coffee mug still read, "But first, coffee." The photo from the company retreat showed faces of people whose lives had been upended by everything that followed. Some blamed me, some thanked me. Most just disappeared into new jobs, new cities, trying to distance themselves from the wreckage. Clara Weston had avoided prison by testifying against Richard, but her career was over. Last I heard, she was working at her sister's real estate office in Florida, far from the corporate world she'd once navigated with such calculated precision. The other executives had scattered like roaches when the lights came on, their LinkedIn profiles scrubbed of any mention of Brightline strategies. My phone sat silent on the coffee table. Once, it had exploded with notifications. Reporters wanting statements, colleagues offering support or condemnation, lawyers negotiating settlements. Now it was quiet. The storm had passed, leaving behind a strange emptiness. I'd won. Completely, devastatingly won. Richard was in prison. Clara was ruined. Brightline was gone. I had money, job offers, vindication. The whole industry knew my name, Jessica Miller, the whistleblower who'd brought down corruption. Some saw me as a hero, others as a cautionary tale about the cost of standing up to power. But sitting in that beautiful apartment, surrounded by the spoils of my victory, I felt nothing. No satisfaction, no joy, no closure, just a hollow echo where my anger used to live. I pulled out my laptop and opened a blank document. For months, people had asked me to write about what happened, to share my story, to inspire others or warn them or just help them understand. I'd always declined, too raw, too close to it all. But now, in the silence of a Thursday afternoon, I began typing. Friday, 4:47 p.m. They thought they were ending my story. The words flowed, not with vengeance anymore, but with something else. Clarity, maybe. Or just the need to make sense of how ordinary termination had spiraled into federal investigations, prison sentences, and the complete destruction of a company. I wrote about the fear that had consumed me that first weekend, the rage that had fueled my strategy, the cold calculation of deploying evidence like weapons. But mostly, I wrote about the cost, not just to them, but to everyone. The hundreds of innocent employees who'd lost their jobs, the clients who'd been betrayed, the families destroyed by scandal, the part of myself I'd had to kill to become someone capable of such systematic destruction. As darkness fell over Cedarfield, I reached the end of my story, staring at the cursor blinking after the final sentence. Outside, the city moved on, indifferent to the corporate tragedy that had played out in its glass towers. New companies were rising, new executives were scheming, New employees were believing in mission statements and company values that would eventually betray them. I closed the laptop and stood at the window, my reflection ghost-like in the glass. Jessica Miller, 32 years old, financially secure, professionally vindicated, and completely alone with her victory. They'd fired me on Friday, thinking they'd ended my story. By Monday, I'd been strategizing against them, thinking I was writing a new chapter. But standing there in the silence of everything I'd won and everything I'd destroyed, I realized the truth. We'd all lost. Richard in his prison cell, Clara in her exile, me in my expensive emptiness. The company we'd built, corrupted and demolished, was gone, leaving only ghosts and legal documents. The city lights blurred as tears came for the first time since that Friday afternoon. Not tears of sadness or joy, but of exhaustion. The war was over. There was no one left to fight. Nothing left to prove. Nowhere left to direct the anger that had kept me alive for those crucial weeks. I picked up my phone and scrolled through my contacts. Emma had stopped calling months ago. Derek had moved to Seattle. Priya was at a new company, careful to keep her distance from the radioactive whistleblower. My sister texted occasionally. But what could I tell her about this hollow victory that had cost me everything I'd claimed to be fighting for? In the morning, I'd have to decide what came next. The Morrison Foundation offer still stood. 3 tech companies wanted to hire me for my proven strategic thinking. A publisher wanted me to write a book about corporate corruption. Everyone wanted a piece of the Jessica Miller story, the woman who'd brought down giants. But tonight, in the silence of my victory, I finally understood what I'd really done. I hadn't just destroyed them, I'd destroyed the part of me that could ever again believe in mission statements, company values, or professional families. I'd won the war but lost my ability to trust, to belong, to be anything more than the whistleblower. The cautionary tale. The woman who'd burned it all down. Friday, they fired me, believing they'd silenced a problem. By Monday, I was strategizing, believing I was solving one. 6 months later, I sat alone in the ashes of everything we'd built and destroyed, understanding finally that revenge isn't a strategy. It's just another kind of defeat, dressed up as victory. The cursor blinked on my laptop screen, waiting for what came next. But some stories don't have satisfying endings. Sometimes they just end, leaving everyone to count their losses and pretend they've won. Thank you for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Drop a comment below and let's connect. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts. What would you have done in Jessica's position? Let me know in the comments below.